Hi, my name is Adrienne Miao. I'm also an occupational therapy consultant with the Vermont Continence Project. And thank you for joining us for our webinar on building toilet learning savvy classrooms. The objectives of the webinar are to understand toileting and continence as a continuum of skills, link toilet learning to the school curriculum, identify elements of a toilet learning supportive classroom plan, help troubleshoot common issues you may see in the classroom, and enable you to strategize action steps to use in your own classrooms. Continence is an important life skill, but no one is born continent. We teach toilet skills to maximize independence and sense of competence. We must learn these skills, and we may need to relearn them or modify them for different settings. Teaching toilet learning helps facilitate inclusion and access to education. Let's begin by defining a few terms. Continence, the ability to voluntarily control emptying the bladder and bowels effectively in a socially acceptable place and hygienic way. Incontinence is the involuntary loss of bladder or bowel control. Toileting, the daily life skill of participation in a routine for going to the bathroom. Toilet learning or teaching. Toileting is a complex skill set with many components that must be practiced and learned like any other skill set. We choose to use the terms learning and teaching intentionally to represent the acquisition and support of this ongoing process. An individual's continence will continue to evolve and change across the lifespan. It is helpful to use the concept of a continuum when we think about toilet learning. It's not about being trained or untrained as much as we are thinking about a process of acquiring and mastering skills and adapting to changing contexts in order to increase independence. There are several common myths you may hear about when children are ready to begin toilet learning. You may hear that children have to stay dry at night or during naps, that a child must be able to tell you that they need to go, that the child needs to be able to manage their clothing or pull their pants up and down, or that a child must indicate they are bothered by a wet or soiled diaper. We'd like to dispel these myths. Not all children will fit this readiness profile, and they should not be excluded from toilet teaching. Instead, let's work to meet children and families where they are and build upon their learning strategies. Continence is important for preschool and school-age settings. Toilet learning is developmentally appropriate for children in these age groups and is related to self-esteem, dignity, and perceptions of competence for students. Students who are incontinent face additional physical health risks, as well as social risks related to bullying or self-esteem. Continence impacts the inclusion or exclusion of students from their educational programming. And it's cost-effective to make toileting an early priority for both schools and families. As outlined in the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of the Child, all students should be entitled to self-determination, which is the ability to make their preferences, wants, and needs known in relation to decisions about their care, education, and life. More specifically, with toilet learning and continence, self-determination might affect choices such as where a student is changed or changes, how a student will participate in toileting and hygiene, who will assist a student, and how others will discuss toileting and continence with and around students. We also want to respect the diversity of cultural factors, identities, and life experiences that impact toileting. Although a common life skill, there's an endless variety to the steps of toileting. Different social and physical environments, different supplies, equipment, and expectations exist. We need to approach collaboration with sensitivity and openness to working with schools, families, and teams. Healthy habits for growing bodies include fiber, fluids, and movement. A diet high in fiber helps to keep the digestive tract and bowel healthy, promotes regular bowel movements, and helps to prevent health problems such as constipation. When possible, high-fiber foods such as vegetables, fruits, and cereal grains should be included in children's diets. We like to see children having bowel movements regularly, at least 4 times a week or every other day, and up to 3 times a day. The best time to try for a bowel movement is about 20 to 30 minutes after eating. The bladder works best when it can regularly stretch, expand, and fill, and empty. We like to see kids drinking 6 to 8 drinks spaced out across the day. Healthy urination would be 4 to 7 times a day for a child. The CDC recommends schools promote water consumption as a healthy beverage. Schools can do this by meeting free drinking water requirements that go with school lunch and breakfast programs, as well as making clean, free drinking water readily accessible throughout multiple points in school settings. Flavor drops can also be helpful for encouraging kids to drink more water. Physical activity and movement are also important elements to keeping things flowing. The CDC recommends that preschool-age children be physically active throughout the school day for growth and development. School-age children and adolescents should do at least an hour of moderate to vigorous intensity activity every day. Growing, moving, and being healthy are explicitly linked to curriculum through the Vermont Early Learning Standards. The growing, moving, and being healthy domain is foundational to all the other domains. Children who get adequate daily physical activity and rest, good nutrition, and can take care of their own body needs will have better learning and developmental outcomes. From the VELS. The VELS also align with the National Association for the Education of Young Children's Developmentally Appropriate Practices and the Head Start Early Learning Outcome Framework. Goal 2, under Element 2, Health and Safety Practices, states children develop personal health and self-care habits and become increasingly independent. Several parts of Goal 2 relate specifically to toilet learning and participation in toilet tasks. Just as toilet skills are foundational in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, toilet teaching should be foundational, Tier 1, universally designed core instruction provided to all students in the whole class. All schools should provide children adequate facilities, opportunities, instructions, and health education. Now that we have linked toilet learning to school curriculum, let's talk more about classroom-level toileting education.
The next section of this presentation is on how to implement a classroom toileting plan. So, as you may have gathered from the first several slides of this presentation, we are not discussing the kinds of interventions that you would use in a particularly complex situation, one-to-one, with a student who has not responded to some of these more conventional group-based approaches. That these approaches, by and large, can support most students who may be having a toileting challenge in the classroom setting. We are going to use a 5 W's approach: who, what, when, where, why, and how, to walk through some of these questions of how to implement a plan and some of the answers that you might use. The first question we'll answer is who. This is the personnel question. Who will implement the plan? Who will make programming decisions? Who will provide hands-on toileting or continence support if need be? Who will keep data? Who will provide and purchase barrier garments, changes of clothes if necessary, and who will wash them? Who is responsible for communicating with parents or caregivers when clothes or barrier garments run low, or to share progress data? And these may all be the same individual, or it may be multiple individuals. Here are some recommendations for answering the who question. You want to designate team time and determine roles in classroom toileting. On a class-wide basis, who will be the decision maker related to toileting questions? And sometimes that decision maker is responsible for escalating questions if they can't be answered by your own classroom staff. They may need to go to administration to ask whether something matches a school policy. Direct supports. And sometimes it's important to answer the question of whether that person is permitted in the bathroom with a student. That's not the case at every school and in every situation. Who will create relevant resources like visual supports, video models, or reinforcers? We will talk in a while about some of those kinds of supports, and we'll need to know who is going to be responsible for creating them and who has the skills to create them. Who will communicate with the caregivers? You're going to designate the person that's doing that. Is it the person who's providing the care, or is it the decision maker in your classroom? You're going to confer with your school health staff, such as your school nurse, to confirm that you are using best practices in health and wellness. And also make sure that whatever plan you create for your classroom, you are sharing with your school administration. Next are the what questions. What are your goals and objectives? To answer this question, you need to know what are the chief concerns for toileting and continence in your class or group. For example, is your main concern right now working on hygiene concerns, such as having many students who are not effective at wiping or clothing management? Or is your chief concern right now that maybe you have a group of students that are having accidents on a fairly consistent basis? And what are your goals? So your goal should be obviously related to your concern, and it's important to actually outline it specifically, right? Our goal is to have these students be independent toilet users without support. Or our goal for right now is for these students to respond to an adult prompt to go and use the bathroom. And of course, laying out what are your top priorities for toileting, because you may have many goals and you may have many concerns. However, it's often helpful to start with just one or two of them. And then, what are the key skills and the short-term objectives that are needed for those goals? So that's taking the big picture goal that you may have and actually getting into the nitty-gritty of what are the component skills or the plans that should be put in place for our students to be successful meeting those goals. Here are some recommendations related to your what questions. You want to choose your priority class-wide goals and foci for toileting and continence. That means that rather than just expecting that you're going to reach all of your goals at the same time, you want to be really clear on which ones you're working on first. You want to determine a baseline for your students who are still mastering toileting and continence skills. It's really important to know if your students who are still having accidents in your class, are they having accidents daily? Are they having accidents weekly? Are they having accidents multiple times a day? It's important to know this because as you go back to evaluate whether your plan has been effective and whether any student or group of students needs their supports to be escalated to a more intensive level, you want to be able to tell not just has this plan been hopefully 100% effective, but potentially partially effective. So as for this question of being able to pull apart the components of your goals and make sure that you are putting a plan in place that will effectively meet them, you're going to want to consult with your related service professionals, your OT, your PT, your SLP, to analyze the task you're teaching and pick those short-term objectives for your group. So if you are the early childhood special educator, I suggest not to go it alone because those disciplines also will have a lot of helpful information to offer you. Our next group of questions will be when questions related to schedules and timing. When are the best times for students to access the bathroom? Now, that when question is going to need to be answered with two different factors. One being, when is it most appropriate in your classroom for students to use the bathroom, as well as when is the bathroom most needed in my classroom? And those might have different answers that you'll have to reconcile. When are students routinely having accidents? You may find that there are patterns across the day, either for individual students or even your students as a group. When in your day can you teach and practice toileting and continence-related skills and information? For example, clothing management, body knowledge and sensation, and more. While some of these skills are very specifically toileting related and may be very private, some of these skills and some of these pieces of information also can very well be integrated into your classroom, right? These questions of how do we manage our clothing, even how much toilet paper should we be using, or how do we wash our hands quickly and effectively? How will a student be asked to sit on the toilet and for how long? And how will that information be relayed to them? How will they know how long they're supposed to be sitting? Will there be a timer, some kind of countdown? And when will class toilet and continence plans be reviewed and progress towards toileting goals be monitored? So, as well as looking at the whens of our daily lives in the classroom, we also need to be looking at this long arc of time where we're deciding how we'll know when we have made enough progress or whether our plans are working. So first and foremost, the most important point on the question of when should students be permitted to use the bathroom is that we need to allow free access to toilets. This is regardless of the students' ages, regardless of their developmental needs. It is extremely important from a physiological perspective that students are permitted, that all people are permitted to use the bathroom when they need to. This is especially important for the development of a healthy bladder and healthy bowel function. Teaching withholding, which essentially is what happens when we restrict toileting use to specific times of the day, can actually have long-term detrimental effects for some young bodies. And unfortunately, if you are a delayed toilet user, delayed toilet learner, you may in fact have less of a sensation or less of a perception of the need to go and not be able to learn as independently when you've been asked to withhold your urine or your feces. You also want to include explicit toilet times in your class schedule. And this is not just for the preschool setting. This should go on well into the primary grades because often students are incredibly busy, extremely preoccupied, and again, those students who can hold it for longer may not even recognize the need to go. And those students who do recognize the need to go may be holding it because there is not an explicit place in the day that they've been encouraged to use the bathroom. You also can create classroom visual supports that include bathroom breaks that allow for universal prompting. So you'll see right here on this slide a very simple daily schedule with times of day on the left side and then the events of the day on the right side. If you have a student in your class who needs more prompting than other peers to use the bathroom, or maybe needs a visual prompt, you can very easily create a smaller individualized version of the same schedule that includes bathroom breaks embedded in the schedule. So you've created a universal support that has the flexibility to add these components when needed. You also want to take data on the timing and frequency of students wetting and soiling and build hygiene breaks to match. And the reason that this is so important is that we don't want to just willy-nilly create a toilet schedule based on some idea of when students might be having accidents or might be needing the toilet, when in fact we can look at some very hard and fast data that tells us when they need the toilet. They will be telling us if they are having accidents at particular times of day. You also want to introduce tools that support time concepts throughout your classroom day and then use those during toileting. So, for example, on this slide, you'll see a picture of a square that has sort of a red pizza pie timer on it. That's called a time timer. It's one of many, many kinds of visual timers that you can use throughout your day. And then when you have a student that may need a little more support or information to stay on the toilet when requested, they are already familiar with this kind of timer. People also use small sand timers or gel timers. People may use a song, and when the song is over, the toilet sit is over. It's really important to use these supports in a generalized way and not just for toileting, because if kids perhaps are really not interested in using the toilet and we're only using these supports during toileting, they might get somewhat aversive to using these supports or not even be willing to learn them in the first place. And toilet sits can seem very, very long when no one has ever told you how long they will last. Our next set of questions are our where questions related to spaces and equipment. Where will toilet learners use the toilet? It's not uncommon that if a classroom has a small number of children who are still learning toileting skills, they may be instructed or directed to use the toilet somewhere other than where their peers are using the bathroom. And sometimes there's a specific reason for that related to personnel or spaces or environments, and sometimes there's not. So it's important to lay out the answers. Where will continence products be stored? For preschool age students, many of whom may still be in pull-ups, it is not all that unusual to think about storing those products in a visible place in your classroom or classroom bathroom. On the other hand, if your students are older or they have concerns about their privacy or dignity for any reason, it's important to make sure that those continence products are stored in a location that respects the dignity and privacy of that student. That can mean a small backpack or a private non-see-through toiletry bag in the bathroom. It can mean the student brings the products in the bathroom themselves. The possibilities are simply matched to the environment that you are working with. Where will students change their pull-ups and clothes? Again, sometimes this may happen in a nurse's office or outside of the classroom's en suite bathroom, but in just as many cases, there may not really be a necessary reason for that to happen. And are equipment or modifications required for a universally accessible toilet and changing space? You'll see in this picture right here on the left side of this slide, a simple platform with handrails that allows this child's feet to touch the ground when they're using the toilet. So while this child potentially could have climbed up on this very, very tall toilet, the fact is that for pelvic floors to relax and abdomens to relax so that as much pee and urine can come out as possible and so bodies can feel as safe and comfortable as possible, we need often to bring the floor up to a greater height to support children's feet and also often bring in a handrail to support them. Here are some answers to where questions. You want to encourage toileting and changing practices that conform to the least restrictive environment available. Not every diaper needs to be changed in the nurse's office. If a student is relatively independent with hygiene related to toileting or clothing management related to toileting, they probably do not need to leave the classroom to engage in their hygiene and changing. In fact, when we take students out of the classroom for extended periods of time in order to have them change in other environments, we are usually impacting their access to their education. We want to make sure and create sensory/motor-friendly toileting environments. As you saw on that last page, we want to make sure that we are bringing the floor up to meet children's feet so that they can sit on the toilet securely with their feet supported. That may be done by the use of footstools, handrails, as well as from a sensory perspective, limiting visual distractions and ensuring privacy and dignity. Some students also may need things like a quilt or other blanket tacked on a wall to reduce echo in the bathroom. You may want to think about decreasing the amount of objects that are stored in the bathroom or potentially covering them with a towel or a sheet. And making sure that bathrooms smell fresh and not have strong chemical smells as much as possible. As I referenced on the last slide, you want to make sure that you store your continence products in a way that respect dignity and access needs of students. So if you have a student who is going into the bathroom to toilet independently, you need to find a place that both respects their privacy and allows them to independently access their materials. You also want to make sure and create toileting contingencies for field trips, specials, and other events that may have your students away from the classroom for an extended period of time or away from a familiar home bathroom for an extended period of time. Why? Comprehension and motivation. One question that you may want to ask related to student comprehension and motivation of toileting related skills is, are you using reinforcers to support toilet teaching? Do your students understand expectations around toileting and continence? And have you used multiple modalities to teach them if necessary? Would your students benefit from learning more about body processes, nutrition, or digestion to understand what is happening in toileting? Here are some recommendations to the why questions, comprehension, and motivation. Teach toileting body processes and hygiene concepts in methods that are accessible to all students as part of the general health curriculum. Some students may be able to understand the necessity or feelings related to toileting very easily from the bottom up, from the feeling in their body. Some other students may rely on information that they receive in more of a teacher-learner way to understand what they are feeling in their body. When we teach in multiple modalities, we normalize this idea that many people may need to learn these skills in different ways. We want to think about classroom reinforcement approaches differentiated as needed. And in the next slide, we're going to talk more about reinforcers. You want to create and display meaningful resources that support sequencing for toileting and hygiene. On the right side of this slide, you will see a grid of icons. Some of them are in series, like a task strip, walking through hand washing, and others are simply single icons that you might be able to use in the toilet teaching process. We want to make sure that these are offered to all students because offering these kinds of supports up front may mean that you have fewer one-to-one interventions to do down the line. Why to provide reinforcers? On the Continence Project, we are often asked by teams whether it is okay for them to use some kind of reward for students for engaging in toileting. There seems to be a common expectation that students should learn toileting skills without any kind of reward or motivation for doing it. And this may be true for some students, but there are also many students, many toilet learners, who may need a little more encouragement to be able to engage in toileting successfully or want to engage in toileting successfully. Why would that be? Well, in our experience, the process of toilet learning is not intrinsically motivating for most learners after 2 to 3 years of age. So while as a toddler or young preschooler, you may be really excited about your achievement in becoming a person who goes into the bathroom and uses the potty all by yourself or knows when you need to go, after that age, unfortunately, most children have received a lot of messages about the accidents that they've had or the messes that they've made or even the inconveniences that they've caused to people or the fact that big boys and girls use the bathroom, but they don't yet. So while there may be someone out there who is older than 2 or 3 years old who is highly motivated to learn on their own, the reality is that probably most of your students would be more motivated if they had some sort of external reward. Reinforcing their growth also helps them to recognize their own capacity to learn and change when the goal may be far away. So while we all know that the goal may be, complete independence in all toileting skills, we're not there yet with your student. And that student needs something to show them that they just took a step, that they are currently doing something that is helping them along the road to this bigger goal. We also get questions about the use of immediate reinforcers versus charts or tokens. So immediate reinforcers can be any number of things, from a food-based reward to a very small toy to a high five or a thumbs up or having a dance party or playing a game on the iPad with an adult. Any of those things are going to be great reinforcers so long as they are something that's motivating for your students. A chart or token really depends on the student's ability to understand that somewhere down the line, they are going to get something great and they have to actually receive some kind of surge of excitement from receiving that token because they know that something great is coming in the future. Now, that's going to be dependent on your student and their capacity to understand something pretty abstract. It's also going to be dependent on your ability to represent that. So representing it by use of a star chart may be a little abstract if the star chart doesn't show a clear ending with the reward that the student really wants at the end of those stars. So those are some things to consider. Now, as I mentioned, we want our reinforcers to help teach a student that they are following the steps that we want on the road towards independent toileting. So there are many skills along the way that we may want to reinforce. It may be as simple as sitting when requested, or even simply going into the bathroom to be changed when requested. That in and of itself is a step for some learners. Self-initiation, meaning rather than me telling you to go into the bathroom, you take yourself into the bathroom when you need to go. That's something that you can reinforce. Successfully urinating or having a bowel movement in the toilet is something else to reinforce because we may ask students to sit, or they may even self-initiate going in and sitting, but not successfully getting their urine or stool into the toilet. Participating in hygiene is also something that we may want to reinforce for our students. On the other hand, we really want to avoid reinforcing dryness. Reinforcing dryness can be a very dangerous cycle in which a child will withhold for longer and longer. So again, just as we talked about before in the when section, we really want to encourage students that when they feel the urge to use the bathroom, they go and they use it. Last, we get to the how section: instruction, accommodations, and modifications. How will students participate in toileting incontinence, and with what levels of support from staff? Has the team agreed on teaching strategies for your classroom toilet learning plan and differentiation of that plan as needed? Here are some recommendations for how: instruction, accommodations, and modifications. Agree on appropriate levels of prompting and accommodations provided within the greater classroom teaching and learning environment. On the next slide, we are going to talk about prompt hierarchies, which essentially are how much prompting and what type of prompting you're offering your students. So you want to make sure that you're relatively in agreement across your staff about how you're going to do that for your group and individual students. You also want to choose the priority skill for a period and highlight that skill with your use of accommodations and prompt levels. So if you are really, really working on hygiene, on all children or many children learning how to wipe after toileting, you will be sure and give the most emphasis to wiping while perhaps offering more support on other skills and less of an expectation of independence with other skills. You also want to make sure that you're choosing language that is age and development respectful for toilet concepts and use it throughout your classroom day. Unfortunately, when students are not independent in using the toilet, we will often use the same words with them that we would use for a much younger child who may not yet be independent with toileting. Things like calling it a potty instead of a toilet, diapers or pull-ups instead of briefs or continence barriers. All of these words really matter. Things like telling kids that they're a big boy or a big girl if they use the toilet, while it might be appropriate in the toddler or maybe even preschool community, it's not appropriate once children get to elementary school. You also want to work with your staff to create a shared vocabulary related to toileting skills and activities. That means that you as a classroom staff will decide what kinds of words are you using to refer to students' body parts or the skills that they're engaging in, or are you making sure that you are all calling it a toilet versus calling it a potty? Prompt hierarchies. Prompt hierarchies are a helpful set of tools or a helpful set of concepts to consider when you are teaching toileting. The process of teaching toileting, as it says on this slide, is a step-by-step move towards independence for the learner. When we give the learner the just right amount of information and support, we help them to build their skills and confidence. Decreasing prompting can also decrease opposition and refusals since there are fewer direct orders or requests from adults. If we are always instructing students to use the bathroom by picking them up and carrying them to the bathroom, there is a lot for that student to protest against. If instead we create a system where a student is responding to perhaps a visual prompt or even a sound in the classroom, rather than an adult-specific directive, you are going to have a lot less grounds for that student to oppose you, essentially. So moving from the most invasive level of prompting outwards, you can see that you could use a full physical prompt, and there are some examples of what that would be. I will essentially never recommend the use of a full physical prompt or a full physical assist, because if a student is that opposed to going to use the bathroom, you generally are just working against their opposition. You may use a touch prompt. A touch prompt might be a gentle tap on the shoulder or a hand, or it could be pointing to a spot that the learner needs to wipe more effectively. And a touch prompt is a gentle physical way to remind or help your student to attend. A model prompt is that the adult is going to show the child how to do the skill that you want them to do, or where you want them to go, or what it is you're hoping they're going to complete. A verbal prompt is simply using your words to say, you need to go into the bathroom now, or oops, looks like you need to wipe more, or something like that. These tend to be the most common kinds of prompts that we may use, and they often are opposed by students. If that is the case, you may want to look towards using an even less invasive prompt, meaning a visual or gestural prompt. A visual prompt may be something like holding up a picture of the bathroom or some kind of other visual support that allows the student to know, or a group of students to know, that we're going to use the bathroom very soon, or I'm expecting you to go and try to use the bathroom, or go and change your brief, or something like that. And a gestural prompt is essentially the same. It's pointing to the bathroom, or pointing to the next thing that you want the child to do, like move on to washing their hands. And independence is that the child is essentially doing it without your support. Here's a case study that brings together some of the information we've just discussed. In a kindergarten class, there are still several students who sometimes have urine accidents. You don't know if there are patterns, but it does seem to get worse as the day goes on. The class has an ensuite bathroom, but the toilet is not kinder-sized. Some students do fight back when told to go to the bathroom. It often seems to be in the middle of their preferred activity. You take data, what and when, and discover that most of these accidents are clustered during morning choice after breakfast and recess after lunch. Here are some recommendations of how you might address this case study. Choose your goal, your what. In this case study, the classroom staff chose the goal of, with adult prompting, students will use the toilet after meals and snacks and have fewer accidents. And you may have chosen a goal that was a relatively more independent goal. Without adult prompting, independently, the students will use the toilet. But in this case, they chose a more measured step-by-step goal. You're going to arrange a schedule so that your class aide, that's a who, is with your class in the period after each meal, the when. You'll prompt your students using the least prompting possible, starting with whole class sources of information. So you may have a classroom schedule that has a designated toileting time, and perhaps some students may need you to use a separate visual representation that tells them it's toileting time. You want to prompt it at the time when those most resistant students are not engaged in a high preference activity. Maybe you build it right into the transition in your classroom. You want to collaborate with the school nurse to find books and 3D models about the body, explaining why it's so important to pee when you feel it, and then why accidents happen if you don't. And you're going to add footstools and seat reducers to your sink and toilet so that your students can access them easily and also have a full and comfortable urine release. Troubleshooting common issues. One very common issue that school personnel face is accidents and floor wetting and what to do about those. So our program has been encouraged by the State School Nursing Association that any student who is routinely wet at school should have a barrier garment on. This is really a matter of public health and well-being, not just for that student and their safety and dignity, but also for all of the other students around them. Even though this may potentially slow the process of toilet learning slightly for some students, it also ensures that your classroom staff is going to be less stressed in the meantime, not having to worry about the health, hygiene, and safety of both that student and the other students. We also want to encourage students to engage in their own cleanup. That means that if they have wet or soiled clothing, you do want to work with that student to do some of their own cleanup. But when that's in a classroom setting, especially where other children might encounter urine or feces, that's a situation where you likely need to clean those floors or surfaces as quickly as possible. But if it's the student's own chair where they've had an accident, that's something that you could maybe pull out of the way with a spray bottle and work with them to clean off that chair. Recess and outings. It is not uncommon for students to have accidents or a need to use the bathroom during recess time. Recess is often right after lunch, which is a time when bladders and bowels are often full. And especially in an environment like Vermont, where it takes so long to get all the stuff on and go outside and thus and such, it can be really a strong desire to say, nope, we're staying out and you can do it when you go in. But we've already established that children need to be able to freely access the bathroom when they need it. So some schools actually have had a practice of having a person who is the indoor recess bathroom monitor who holds that door so children can come in and out as they need to, making sure that there's a free flow of children going to the bathroom when they may need to, supporting them in any way that they might require, and making sure that children are coming and going to the appropriate places. More troubleshooting. Refusals and denials are really common, including the "no, I'm not wet," or "no, I didn't poop," when you know that they did. So one of the things that we can do proactively to decrease refusals or denials is predictable graded prompts, using the same kind of prompts each time that we encourage students to use the bathroom, and also, as we discussed previously, using the least level of prompting and intervention possible. We also know that the fewer novel requests that there are, the fewer opportunities there will be to refuse. If using the bathroom is consistently a part of the same routine, for most students, that's going to reduce the amount of refusal. Also, using nonverbal prompts as much as possible. Fewer direct adult to student requests means fewer opportunities for that student to refuse. Grade your expectations. Make sure that your goals for your student are attainable and scaled appropriately. If you have a student who is routinely refusing to try a skill, it may be that that skill is too difficult for them. It may be that each individual skill you're asking them to do is reasonable, but collectively it's more than they can manage. It's also important to ask for what you want with a student. And this is, of course, true, not just of toileting, but of anything. It's really common for us to use phrases like, "Do you think you're wet?" or "Are you wet?" when we most certainly know that they are. So if you have a student that is routinely refusing, it's important simply to say, "It's time to go change." Make your expectations clear. If you say, "Do you think you're wet?" and they say no, you don't really have anywhere to go from there. Whereas if you say, "It's time to go and change your brief," or "It's time to go and change your pants right now," there's really not a whole lot for them to contradict. What do we do when more support is needed? Our recommendation on the Vermont Continence Project is that you start with health. The vast majority of referrals to the Vermont Continence Project have or had constipation and or related concerns. They have dietary fiber, fluid, or low movement habits, and they may have a history of medical, physical, or emotional trauma. While it can be tempting to go straight to trying to address the toileting outcome that you want, the specific toileting goal, it is so important to make sure that you are addressing it through the lens of all of these other concerns. Specifically, anything that's making toileting more difficult from a body perspective. You want to address these concerns before or simultaneously with creating a plan to increase toilet use. How should we document when more support is needed or given? If the student has a written plan, the continence and toilet learning should be represented in the student's plan, particularly if the student is beyond the age of typical skill acquisition. Often with our IEPs, especially if the student is in elementary school or beyond, we will represent only academic goals and concerns in that IEP, when the fact is that participation in toileting and continence are foundational and fundamental skills for all students at any age. When we document toilet learning in our IEPs or 504 plans, we also have a place that we can reflect on progress or sometimes a lack of progress, as the case may be. If the student has no written plan, this is a good time to discuss the creation of an individualized health plan with the school nurse. An individualized health plan is a place to document the work that you're doing and the accommodations you're making and the expectations that you have for your student in developing toileting skills. On the Vermont Continence Project's own website, you will find many resources that can help support you with some of the questions that we've been raising today. We have videos related to the effective use of reinforcers. We have a video related to the use of positive and supportive language in toilet teaching. And we also have an extensive packet on best practices in toilet teaching in the school system that includes a bank of goals, a bank of accommodations, and some position statements on best practice in toilet teaching.
We have included links to a number of resources that we hope will be helpful as you develop your classroom plans. Please check back on our website as we continue sharing new materials, and we welcome your comments and suggestions.
The University of Vermont Center on Disability and Community Inclusion. We support, we teach, we study, we share, we connect. Find out more at go.uvm.edu/cdci.